Okay, so we'll start with today's class. I hope all of you have listened to the previous class, that is the clinical examination of the cranial nerves 1 to 6. So I'll be continuing the rest of the cranial nerves in today's class. That is the cranial nerves 7 to 12 will be discussed in this class today. So I'll not be giving much introduction about the cranial nerves as it has already been given by Lata ma'am in the previous class. So you know how many pairs of cranial nerves are present and where exactly they get origin from and which are all the different. And see to it that you have to remember the cranial nerves in the order. Okay. So is my screen visible? Okay. So
Yes, ma'am.
So in today's class, the aim of this experiment is to do the clinical examination of cranial nerve 7 to 12. So here I'll be explaining one by one. So first I'll explain about the cranial nerve 7, then I'll explain about 8, 9. So I'll be explaining in the same order. So see the tabular column also, like either you can take a screenshot. So keep it ready so that like once you come to the college, we can just give you the demo. So the tabular column also has to be written accordingly in the order. I think this is what was explained in the previous class already. So why these are called cranial nerves? Because they get origin from the cranium, that is from your brain. So
Excuse
you
me, ma'am.
have, yeah.
And the slide is not moving. It is still the introduction slide only.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Can I continue?
Yes, ma'am, but the slide is not moving. It is still the first slide.
Can you see the pairs of cranial nerves with the brain picture?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. So here
Okay,
you can
thank you,
see
ma'am.
the 12 different pairs of cranial nerves. So which are accordingly in the order. So you have got the first cranial nerve, that is the olfactory. Then second is your optic. Third is the oculomotor. Then you have got trochlea, trigeminal, abducent. Then facial, vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, hypoglossal, vagus, and the accessory nerve. And the 12th cranial nerve you have is your spinal accessory nerve. So before you start the clinical examination of the cranial nerves, first you will be writing your aim. So the aim of the experiment is clinical examination of cranial nerve 7 to 12 in the given subject. So you have already been discussed with most of the clinical examination. So before you start with any of the examination, see to it that you take a consent from the subject that you are going to examine. So first you are going to take the consent from the subject, then you are going to collect the personal data of the subject. So wherein you are going to ask their name, age, gender, occupation. So after you collect all the personal details of the subject, then general physical examination will be done. Then also you are going to check for the vital signs like your pulse rate, your BP, respiratory rate, and the temperature of the subject. So this is the first and foremost thing that you have to do before you proceed with any of the clinical examination. So first let us discuss about the 7th cranial nerve. So 1 to 6 has been already discussed. So I'll be explaining from 7 to 12th cranial nerve. So first let us discuss about the 7th cranial nerve. Your 7th cranial nerve is your facial nerve. So facial nerve will origin from the pons. So ma'am might have already told where exactly the nucleus of the cranial nerves are present. So it is within the brain. So the nucleus for the facial nerve is from the pons and it just lies lateral to that of your 6th nerve nucleus. So with regard to the functions of the facial nerve, so its function is mainly based on the different sets of fibers that are present in this facial nerve and its and where exactly it's supply and what is the function that it brings about. So facial nerve has got 3 sets of fibers and it is a mixed nerve. So you all know which are all the sensory, purely sensory nerve, purely motor nerve, and which are the mixed cranial nerves, wherein the facial nerve is a mixed cranial nerve. It has got 3 different sets of fibers. So the motor fibers, then you have got sensory fibers, and there are also secretomotor fibers. So these motor fibers, so the first thing is your motor fibers. So this motor fibers, they mainly supply all the muscles of your face as well as the scalp. I repeat, the motor fibers of the facial nerve, it supplies all the muscles of your face as well as the scalp, except for levator palpebrae superioris. Also, it supplies your stylohyoid muscle, then buccinator muscle and the stapedius muscle. So, the motor fibers or the motor component of the facial nerve supplies all the muscles of the face and the scalp except for levator palpebrae superioris, and it also supplies the stylohyoid muscle, buccinator muscle and the stapedius muscle. So, with
Excuse me,
regard,
ma'am.
this is the hello, yeah.
Excuse me, ma'am. The slide is not changing. It is still the second slide.
Can you see the 7th now?
No, ma'am. It is still the second slide only.
Now,
No, ma'am. Still the same slide.
what about now?
Yes, ma'am. Now it is okay, ma'am.
Okay. So here the sensory fibers. So the sensory component of the facial nerve, it brings about the taste sensation from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. So the motor fibers, it supplies all the facial muscles and the scalp muscle except for levator palpebrae superioris, and also it supplies your stylohyoid muscle, buccinator muscle and the stapedius muscle. Whereas the sensory component or the sensory fibers supply the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. And also it has got secretomotor fibers, so which supplies your lacrimal gland and all the salivary glands except for your parotid gland. That is, it supplies your sublingual and the submandibular salivary gland. So it also controls salivation as well as the tear formation, as it supplies your lacrimal and the salivary glands. So what happens if there is a lesion to the facial nerve? So if there is a lesion to the facial nerve, also you can classify the facial palsy into two different headings. So if the lesion is present within or distal to the facial nucleus, it is called as lower motor neuron paralysis or infranuclear facial palsy. So in case if the lesion is present above the facial nucleus, it causes supranuclear facial palsy or the upper motor neuron paralysis. So in case of lower motor neuron paralysis, what happens is the paralysis results in both upper as well as the lower parts of the face. So which results in the atrophy of all the facial muscles. Also, since it supplies the tongue, so there will be loss of taste sensation, and also it results in hyperacusis. So hyperacusis is the damping effect of your stapedius muscles will not take place in this condition. So the high intensity sound will not be reduced. So the sound of high intensity will be heard as high intensity. So damping effect will not take place in case of lower motor neuron paralysis. Whereas if there is supranuclear facial palsy or the upper motor neuron paralysis, it mainly results in the paralysis of the lower half of the face. Here, because the muscles of the upper part of the face have bilateral innervation. So it does not produce atrophy of the facial muscles, and also the taste sensation is not altered in case of upper motor neuron paralysis. Okay, so in case if there is paralysis of your facial muscles, what happens? If there is paralysis of the facial muscles and the muscles of your scalp, so there is loss of facial expression. So that you won't be able to see the symmetry of the face. So you will be observing asymmetry in the face. Also the furrows over the head and the nasolabial folds will disappear. And also the Alanesi muscle does not function properly during respiration. Also, you can see the deviation of the angle of the mouth to the opposite side. Since it supplies the orbicularis oculi muscle, what happens if there is a paralysis to this muscle? The eyes will be wide open and the eyebrows will droop down. So later in the picture, you will be able to see all this. Okay. So in case if there is a paralysis to your buccinator muscle, so what happens? There will be accumulation of the food in between the cheeks and your teeth, and the food that is accumulated will dribble along with saliva from the angle of mouth, because the angle of mouth is deviated to the opposite side. So in case if there is a paralysis to the stapedius muscle, so since its function is damping of sound, the higher intensity sounds will not be damped to the lower frequency. So the patient will complain of hyperacusis. Also, in case if there is paralysis to your sensory fibers, there is loss of taste sensation from the anterior two-third of the lung, anterior two-third of your tongue. So in case if there is a paralysis to your secretomotor fibers, so it decreases the salivary secretion as well as your secretion, that is tear formation and tear secretion. So which results in dryness of the eye. So mainly the dryness in the conjunctiva. So this condition is called xerosis or the xerophthalmia. So these are all the various effects of paralysis of the facial nerve. So let us now look into how to test the facial nerve, that is the seventh cranial nerve. So is the tabular column visible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So now we'll be talking about the examination of your seventh cranial nerve. So first you're going to take the history. So how do you test? So first I've explained what happens if there's a lesion to the facial nerve. Either it could be upper motor neuron lesion or the lower motor neuron. So first you are going to check for all these things. So first you are going to take the patient history, whether he has got hyperacusis or is there any dribbling of saliva. So you know the reason for each of this as I have explained you already. So why there is hyperacusis, why there is dribbling of saliva, why food gets accumulated in between the cheeks. Also you are going to ask whether there is dryness of the eye, whether the person is suffering from xerosis or not. So in case if the patient does not have any of this histories, so this is your examination table. So you're going to observe all these things. So you're in this, you're going to observe both on right as well as the left side. So you're going to write there is no such history. So in a normal individual, all such things will not be present. So once you find out that there is no such history of hyperacusis or there is no dribbling of saliva or the accumulation of food particles in between the gums and the cheeks, or if there is no xerosis or that is the dryness of the eyes, the inference that you are going to write is normal. So this is the first thing that you are going to check for. Is it clear? Okay. So the next is you're going to observe or look for the facial expression of the subject. Then you're going to check for the symmetry of the face. Usually the face is bilaterally symmetrical. Also you're going to check for the nasolabial fold and the angle of the mouth. Whereas the symmetry and the nasolabial fold both are bilaterally symmetrical and a normal individual. So in the subject, if you find it is bilaterally symmetrical, then in the inference column you are going to write it as normal. So next is you will ask the subject to raise his forehead to check for the wrinkles over the forehead. So here, in case what happens is, also you will ask the subject to show his upper teeth or you will ask him to smile. So whether to check the angle of mouth is deviated to the healthy side, because due to the unopposed action of the facial muscles, so the angle of mouth will be deviated. So but in the usually if there is no lesion to the facial nerve, the angle of mouth will not be deviated. So angle of mouth you are going to check by asking the individual to smile or to show us teeth. So if there is no deviation, say the inference will be normal. So then you are going to check for the furrows over the head. So ask the subject to raise his head. So whenever the subject raises his forehead, you can see wrinkles over the forehead. So in a normal individual, the wrinkles will be very evident. So if there is no facial palsy, the wrinkles will be evident. Also, you can ask the subject to frown. So whenever he frowns, so that is one of the facial expression. So you can see the wrinkles will be very evident and the inference will be normal. So here again you are going to check for orbicularis oculi muscle. So to check for the orbicularis oculi muscle, you will ask the subject to close his eyes as tightly as possible. So the subject will be closing his tight and the examiner will try to open the eyelids. But in a normal individual, without the subject's effort, the examiner will not be able to open the eyelids. But in case if there is a facial palsy and if there is damage to the nerve supply that supplies your orbicularis oculi muscle, the subject will be easily able to, will not be able to resist. So the examiner will be easily able to open the eyelids. Okay, and in this case, in case of complete paralysis of this orbicularis oculi muscle, since this patient will not be able to close his eye, what happens is when he tries to close the eye, the eyeball will roll upwards. And this condition is called Bell's phenomena. So in the picture, I'll be showing it. So this is how you are going to check for orbicularis oculi muscle. So in the observation, the eyelids are not open even after applying the force. Here the examiner fails to open the eyelids of the patient in a normal individual. So the inference will be normal. See here you can see in case if there is a facial palsy. So you can see the asymmetry in the face. So here you can observe with the eyebrows, they are not in the same line. So there is asymmetry, and also you can see the disappearance of the nasolabial fold, and also the angle of mouth is deviated. So here the inability of the top. So also you can see the drooping of the eyeball. So the eyeball is rolling upwards. So the individual will not be able to close his eyes. So this condition is termed as Bell's phenomenon. Okay, so now we are going to check for the buccinator muscle. So here, and also the orbicularis ops. So here you are going to ask the subject to visual. So if he tries to visual, if he is able to visual, then there is no lesion or damage to the nerve supply to this particular muscle. So the inference will be normal. Also, to check for the buccinator muscle, or you can ask the subject to inflate his cheek. So if the cheeks are inflated and when you tap with your finger, if there is no escape of hair, because it will be under the subject's control. So if there is no control over the buccinator muscle, so the air will easily escape through the mouth. So in a normal individual, usually there is no escape of it and the inference will be normal. So this is how we are going to check for the buccinator as well as the orbicularis oculi muscle. So to check for the nasolabial fold, you can ask the subject to smile or to show his teeth. So whenever the subject smiles or shows his teeth, the nasolabial fold will be prominent on both the sides. So there won't be any deviation of the angle of mouth in a normal individual. Also, to check the prominence of platysma, you will ask the subject to clench his teeth. So whenever he clenches teeth, you can see the prominence of the platysma muscle. Whereas in an individual who has got facial palsy will not be able to, you won't be able to see the prominence of platysma. Here you can see. So whenever the subject frowns, you can see the wrinkles over the forehead. So this is, or you can ask him even to frown. So when he frowns, you can, in a normal individual, you can see this wrinkles. Also to check for the orbicularis oculi. So you can ask the subject to close his eyes and the examiner tries to open the eyelids, wherein the examiner fails in a normal individual, whereas the person who has got facial palsy or a damage to the orbicularis oculi muscle, the eyelids will be easily opened. But in the normal individual, it is very difficult to open the eyelids. So to see the prominence of platysma, you can ask the subject to clench his teeth. Okay. Here also you can see the prominence of the nasolabial fold, also the prominence of the platysma muscle. So here you can even check for the buccinator muscle, wherein see here, once the cheeks of the patient is inflated, when you tap the cheeks, if there is escape of hair, then there is damage to the buccinator muscle. So in case if there is no escape of hair, the individual is normal. So this is how, these are the various tests that you do to check the facial. So that is mainly the motor component of the facial nerve. So to check for the sensory component. So here you are going to check for the taste sensation on the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. So here you are going to take different solutions of sugar, salt and weak solutions of sour and bitter, and you're going to check on the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Okay, so if the subject is able to perceive the taste sensations normally, then it is called normal. So if the individual fails to perceive the taste sensation, then there is damage to the sensory fibers of the facial nerve. So, but when you are testing the taste sensation, so every time the individual has to rinse his mouth before he undergoes the test for other taste solution. So this is how you are going to check for the taste sensation of the, that is a sensory component of the facial nerve. Also, you are going to check for the corneal and the conjunctival reflex, which is already done in the reflex, so on which I'll not be explaining much. There's something called Skimmer's test for the dryness of eyes, so which we are not usually doing it. So here in this test, what happens is they keep the test paper on just below your eyelids. So to check whether the lacrimation is proper or not, whether if there is presence of xerosis or not. So which is usually not done in the classroom setting. So these are the various different tests to test for the facial nerve. So I repeat. So we'll just summarize fast which are all the different tests. So first you are going to take the history of hyperacusis, whether is there any dribbling of saliva from the mouth, all those things. So if there is no dryness, that is xerosis, then next you are going to check for the symmetry and the appearance of the nasolabial fold, and also you are going to look for the angle of the mouth. Then you are going to check for the facial expression, then you're going to check for the orbicularis oculi muscle, and you're going to check whether there is presence of Bell's phenomenon or not. Next, you're going to check for the buccinator muscle, and also for the prominence of platysma. That is all about the motor component. For the sensory component, you're going to check for the taste sensation from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue with different solutions of salt, sugar, and also the sour taste sensations. So in a normal individual, all these taste sensations will be perceived. Whereas if there is a damage to the sensory component of the facial nerve, the individual will not be able to perceive the taste sensation. Then you're going to check for even the corneal and the conjunctival reflex, because here the afferent is your 5th nerve, whereas the efferent is your 7th cranial nerve. Also the Skimmer's test, mainly to test for the xerosis or xerophthalmia, that is the dryness of the eye, so which we are not actually doing it in the classroom setting. So this is all about the 7th cranial nerve. Okay, so now let us proceed to the 8th cranial nerve, so which is your vestibulocochlear nerve. So the vestibulocochlear nerve has got again 2 components. So it gets origin from the groove in between the junction of the pons and the medulla. So the origin of the vestibulocochlear nerve is between the junction of the pons and the medulla. So again, the vestibulocochlear nerve, it is a pure sensory nerve, whereas a facial nerve is a mixed nerve. Whereas the vestibulocochlear nerve, it is a pure sensory nerve. It has got 2 sets of fibers, in which one set will supply the vestibule, whereas vestibule and the semicircular canal, and the other set supplies the cochlea. Okay, the set of fibers which supplies the vestibule and your semicircular canals is mainly concerned with the maintenance of balance, equilibrium, and the sensation of bodily displacement. I repeat, the set of fibers of the vestibulocochlear nerve which supplies the vestibule and the semicircular canal is mainly concerned with the maintenance of body equilibrium, balance, and the sensation of bodily displacement. Whereas the other set which supplies the cochlea is mainly concerned with hearing. So in case if there is a lesion or paralysis to the vestibulocochlear nerve, so if there is a lesion in the set of fibers which supplies your vestibule and the semicircular canal, it results in vertigo, that is the sensation of instability. So the individual will feel the sensation of rotation most of the time. So he complains of dizziness and he says that I'm feeling very giddiness. So all those things will be there. So also you can see nystagmus. Okay, so nystagmus is nothing but to and fro movement of the eyeball. So which is usually involuntary. Okay, so in case if there is a damage to the set of fibers which supplies your vestibule and the semicircular canal, it results in vertigo and nystagmus. So if there is a lesion to the fibers which supplies the cochlea, so there is loss of hearing sensation, probably in the affected side of the individual. So now let us discuss how to test. So with the vestibular branch, so usually we are going to take the history, whether the person is having vertigo, vomiting, dizziness, and also you check whether, like when you observe a person, you will get to know whether he has nystagmus or not. So the individual won't be able to focus. Okay, so he will have to and fro movements, involuntary movements of the eyeball. So in case if you don't find any such history and if there is no nystagmus, then it is normal. Also, there is something called Barnes calorie test, again, which is not done. So here in this test, what happens? We will be introducing water into the semicircular canals. Okay, So whenever a water, so at around 30 degrees centigrade or 44 degrees centigrade will be introduced into the semicircular canals. So that is into the external auditory meatus. So the temperature difference will set up the convection currents in the endolimb. So whenever the convection currents in the endolimbs are set up, it will result in the motion. That is, the cupula is set into motion. So this technique of caloric stimulation is usually clinically used for diagnostic purposes. So it causes, whenever you do Baroness caloric test, it causes nystagmus, vertigo and nausea. Okay, so but here in the classroom setup we are not doing Baroness test and the caloric test is not done here. So to test the cochlear component of the 8th cranial nerve, so we are doing Rene's test and the Weber's test. Also there is something called watch test and whispering test, which we are not actually doing. So in watch test, what we will do is we'll ask the subject to close his eyes and we'll stand behind the subject. So we'll ask the subject to close one ear and we'll slowly bring the watch from a distance. So we'll observe when the patient will be able to hear the tickling sound. So we'll repeat the same thing to the other ear also. So this is how we are going to check for watch test. Okay. So in the whispering test, similarly, the person or the subject will be made to hear to the whisper sound. So if he fails to hear the whispering, then there is damage to the cochlear branch of the vestibulocochlear nerve. So watch test and whispering test are actually not done. Okay. So but we are going to do Rene's test and Weber's test for checking the cochlear component of the vestibulocochlear nerve. So what we do in Rene's test is, see, in Rene's test, each ear is examined separately and also to compare the ability to hear through the bone conduction as well as through the air conduction. So first what we are going to do is we'll occlude the subject's external auditory meatus of the other ear with the thumb. Okay, so we are going to, I'll just show you here. So you are going to occlude the external auditory meatus of the other ear with the thumb. Then we'll set the tuning fork vibrating and press the base of the tuning fork over the mastoid process that is behind the ear. So first we are going to place the vibrating tuning fork over the mastoid process behind the ear. So we'll instruct the subject to indicate when he can no longer hear it. So that is, first we are going to check for the bone conduction. So when the individual fails to hear the vibration on the bone, then immediately we'll transfer the vibrating tuning fork to the side of the head close to the ear. Okay, so if the hearing is normal, so in case if there is no damage to the cochlear branch of the vestibulocochlear nerve, even after the vibrating has stopped on the mastoid process, the subject will be able to hear the vibration when it is placed in front of the ear. So it shows that bone conduction is better than, air conduction is better than bone conduction. So it is referred to as Rene's test is positive. So air conduction is better than bone conduction. Rene's test is positive. But in case if there is damage to the cochlear nerve, the person will only be able to appreciate the vibration over the mastoid process. He won't be able to hear it when it is placed in front of the ear. In that condition, bone conduction is better than air conduction. Then it is Rene's test is negative. But in a normal individual whose cochlear nerve is intact and if there is no lesion to the cochlear nerve, always Rene's test is positive. That is, air conduction is better than bone conduction. So this you are going to check in the Rene's test, and the vibrating tuning fork will be using is either 256 Hz or the 512 Hz tuning fork will be used to check for the Rene's test. Also, there is another test called Weber's test. So in this also bone conduction is tested in both the ears simultaneously. Okay, so there alternatively we are doing, first we are going to check the right and then we are going to check for the left. But in Weber's test, we are going to check the bone conduction in both the ears simultaneously. So first place the base of the tuning fork over the forehead. Okay, so here you can see, you can place the base of the tuning fork over the forehead and ask the subject to indicate whether the sound is heard equally in both the ears, or if he complains that sound is better heard in any one of the ears. I repeat, so first you will set the tuning fork into vibration and you will be placing it on the forehead. So in a healthy individual, when the tuning fork is placed on the forehead, the sound will be heard equally on both the sides. But if the sound is better heard by the defective ear, the defect is due to the conduction deafness. This is because masking effect of the environment noise is absent on the affected side. So if the sound is better heard in the normal ear, then so-called sound is lateralized to the normal ear. Then hearing loss is defective in the ear and it is due to the nerve deafness. So this is how we are going to do the Weber's test. So this is how we are going to check for the vestibulocochlear nerve. Also there is something called Squabach's test which we are usually not doing. In this test also the bone conduction of the subject is compared with that of the normal subject. So here we are going to take two different subjects. So the patient's bone conduction is compared with the other normal individual, but we are not going to do it in the classroom setup. Squabach's test. So for vestibulocochlear nerve we are going to check for Rene's test and Weber's test. Also we are not going to do watch test and whisper test, but you should be knowing these are the different tests that we are going to do to check for the vestibulocochlear nerve. So now let us discuss about the glossopharyngeal nerve. So which is your ninth cranial nerve. So glossopharyngeal nerve, so it is again the origin, it is attached to almost 5 to 6 rootlets, the upper part of the medulla. Again glossopharyngeal nerve, it is a mixed nerve like your facial nerve. So it has got again 3 different sets of fibers. There is the motor fiber, sensory fibers and the secretomotor fibers. So the motor fibers, they supply stylopharyngeus muscle, and the sensory fibers, they bring about the taste sensation from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, whereas with facial it is anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Whereas the glossopharyngeal nerve, it brings about the taste sensation from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, and mucous membrane of the pharynx is also supplied by the sensory fibers, and the secretomotor fibers, they supply the parotid gland. So the facial nerve will supply the sublingual and the submandibular salivary glands, whereas the glossopharyngeal nerve will supply the parotid gland. So in case if there is a lesion to the glossopharyngeal nerve, so the paralysis will result. See, the deglutition is not much affected because the superior and the medial constrictor of the pharynx are intact, because this is supplied by your vagus nerve, that is the 10th cranial nerve, whereas the loss of taste sensation will take place from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. Also there will be decreased salivary secretion which results in difficulty in swallowing, because the parotid gland will be affected, so which results in decreased salivary secretion. So how do you test for glossopharyngeal nerve? That is your 9th cranial nerve. So you are going to check for the taste sensation from the posterior 1/3, like how the similar way you tested the taste sensation for the facial nerve. In a similar way, you are going to check for the taste sensation over the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. So in this mainly the bitter sensations are perceived normally. So if the individual is able to perceive the sensation, then the nerve is intact, the inference will be normal. Also, we'll be checking for palatal reflex, which is also called as gag reflex. So here you are going to tickle at the back of the pharynx either with a finger or with a swab stick. So whenever you do that, you will be able to observe the reflex contraction of your pharyngeal muscle. So in case if there is damage, so this particular reflex is absent. So again, it depends whether we are going to do this test or not. So whenever you perform a gag reflex, there will be contraction and elevation of your posterior pharyngeal wall in a normal individual. So if you can see the contraction and elevation of the posterior pharyngeal wall, then the inference will be normal, that is the glossopharyngeal nerve is intact. So these are the two tests that you are going to do to check for the 9th cranial nerve. Also the baroreceptor reflex, wherein you are going to check for the postural changes in BP. So you know how the BP varies in different postures. So that will be observed. Next is your 10th cranial nerve, which is your vagus nerve, which is again a mixed nerve. Here it origins from 8 to 10 rootlets to the lateral aspects of your medulla oblongata. So it is a mixed nerve which has got both the motor component as well as the sensory component. So the motor fibers, they supply almost all the involuntary muscles of respiration, your heart, and also the GI tract. Almost up to 2/3 of your transverse colon, it is supplied by the vagus nerve. So the motor fibers, it supplies the involuntary muscles of respiration, your heart, and your GI tract up to the 2/3 of your transverse colon. Also, it supplies the voluntary muscles like all the constrictor muscles of the pharynx, all intrinsic muscles of the larynx, and the muscles of the soft palate are supplied by the vagus. And the sensory component of the vagus is mainly distributed to the mucous membrane of your GI tract and also the mucous membrane of the larynx, pharynx, and the soft palate. So in case if there is a paralysis or a lesion to the vagus nerve. So here the subject mainly complains of regurgitation of fluids through the nose during swallowing due to the defective elevation of your soft palate. I repeat, in case if there is a paralysis to the vagus nerve. So the individual will complain of the regurgitation of fluids through the nose during swallowing due to the defective elevation of the soft palate. Also, there will be defective pronouncing of the words because it requires the complete closure of nasopharynx. But in case if there is a paralysis, it results in nasal tone of the voice. Therefore, the rub is pronounced as rum. So, all B pronunciation will be M pronunciation and G pronunciation will be N pronunciation. So like that, a nasal tang will be added to the voice. Also, the voice will become hoarse and deep because the vocal cords will be relaxed. So therefore, the utterance of high notes is impossible in case if there is a paralysis to the vagus nerve. So this is mainly seen in bilateral paralysis. So let us now look into how to test for the vagus nerve. So again, here you are going to ask the subject about the history, whether he had regurgitation of food and is there any hoarseness of voice, dysphagia, that is unable to eat, and with speech you are going to observe. So you are going to ask the subject to pronounce few words. So in case if you find the nasal tang in the pronunciation, then there is a defect in the vagus nerve. So there is damage to the vagal innervation. So if you don't find any search history, no search history, then the individual is normal. If you don't find any nasal quality of the speech when the subject pronounces the words, then the inference will be normal. So next you are going to check for the position of the uvula. So the position of the uvula is ask the subject to open the mouth. Okay. So whenever the individual opens the mouth, you can see, I'll just show you in the picture. So here you can see the position of the whether it is deviated or not, you can check for. Okay, so this you can ask even, and also you can observe the soft palate movements during phonation. Ask the subject to say and observe the movements of both the sides of your palatal arch. So what happens is, in a healthy individual, both palatal arches should raise upwards normally with uvula remaining in the midline. If one side is paralyzed, then that side will remain flat and immobile, and the median raphe will be pulled towards the healthy side. So in bilateral paralysis, the whole of the soft palate will remain motionless. So that you have to observe. So in case when you check if the uvula is centrally placed and the palatal arch moves upwards and backwards, then it is considered as normal. Also, you are going to check for the palatal reflex, that is your gag reflex. Touch the tip of the palate with the cotton swab. So whenever you touch, the palatal arch will move equally on both the sides of the inversion. So this is how you are going to check for the palatal reflex. These are the tests for vagus nerve examination. Also the pharyngeal or the gag reflex. So here you can see the contraction and elevation of the post-pharyngeal wall. So in case if there is contraction and elevation of the post-pharyngeal wall, then the inference will be normal. But the person or the individual, if there is a lesion to the vagus nerve, then you won't be able to see the contraction and elevation of the post-pharyngeal wall. Also, you are going to check for baroreceptor reflex. So that is mainly by observing the postural changes in BP, that is your blood pressure. So these are the various tests to check for the vagus nerve, that is your 10th cranial nerve. So this is how you are going to check for the gag reflex. So next is your 11th cranial nerve. So your 11th cranial nerve, that is the spinal accessory nerve. So it also originates from two different locations, that is it has got both the cranial part as well as the spinal part. So the cranial part of the 11th nerve, it arises from the medulla below the origin of your vagus nerve. So the fibers of this cranial part, they are distributed with the motor branches of the vagus nerve to the larynx as well as your pharynx. Whereas the spinal part of your 11th cranial nerve, it origins from the spinal nucleus lateral to the anterior gray column of the spinal cord, extending up to the 5th cervical segment. Now, in case if there is, and this 11th nerve, it is a pure motor nerve. It supplies mainly two muscles. Okay, that is your sternocleidomastoid muscle and your trapezius muscle. So how do you test for these two muscles? So first you are going to check for sternocleidomastoid muscles. So here, when both the sides of the sternocleidomastoid muscles, they act together, the head is flexed. Okay, ask the subject to flex the head and the examiner will apply passive resistance from below. So if the muscle is paralyzed, it will not be able to, for the subject to flex the head. I repeat, when the ask the subject to flex his head, while the examiner will apply the passive resistance from below. So you are going to ask the subject to flex his head, that is bend his head down, and the examiner will apply the passive resistance from below. But if the muscle is paralyzed, the subject will not be able to flex the head. Only when the muscle acts alone, chin is rotated to the other side and opposite side. The paralysis can be assessed by applying passive resistance from the other side while the subject tries to rotate his chin. If paralyzed, the rotation of the chin towards the opposite side is also not possible. So this is how you are going to check for the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So for trapezius muscle, first you have to look for whether there is any drooping of the shoulder to the affected side. So you just go behind the subject, or even from the front also you can observe whether is there any drooping of the shoulder to any one of the side. So along with trapezius, levator scapulae causes elevation of shoulder. So here, ask the subject to shrug his shoulders while the examiners apply passive resistance on them from above. So I'll show in the picture. So here you can see this is for your sternocleidomastoid muscle. This is for your trapezius muscle. So in case, see here, the subject is asked to shrug his shoulder, whereas the examiner is applying resistance. Okay, so the subject will not be able to shrug his shoulder if there is any damage to the cranial nerve, that is your spinal accessory nerve. So this is how we are going to check for trapezius muscle. So these are the, I repeat, the 11th cranial nerve is supplied to two muscles mainly, that is your sternocleidomastoid muscles, wherein you are going to check for the movement of your chin. Okay, and then also you will ask the subject to flex his head and apply resistance from below. In case if there is any paralysis, the subject won't be able to do these actions. So then you are going to check for the trapezius muscles, wherein the individual is asked to shrug his shoulders and the examiner will apply resistance from above. So if there is a damage to the trapezius muscle, the subject will not be able to shrug his shoulders. If the individual is normal, he will overcome the resistance of the examiner and he'll be able to shrug his shoulders and the inference will be normal. So this is how you are going to check for the 11th cranial nerve. So last is your hypoglossal nerve. So which is your 12th cranial nerve. So the hypoglossal nerve is again a pure motor nerve. Okay. So the origin of the hypoglossal nerve is from the lowermost part of the medulla. So the function of the hypoglossal nerve is it supplies all the muscles of the tongue. So it mainly helps in articulation of the tongue during speech and also during proper mixing of the food with the saliva. So in case if there is a paralysis or if there is any lesion to this hypoglossal nerve, so it results in defective articulation and improper mixing of the food. But you won't be able to appreciate any atrophy of the tongue muscles because the blood supply will be intact to the tongue. So that is why you won't be able to see the atrophy. But there will be defective articulation and improper mixing of the blood. So how do you test for hypoglossal nerve? So first you will ask the subject to protrude his tongue. So first you are going to observe the size, shape and position of the subject. And whenever the subject protrudes his tongue, you will also observe whether there are any toes or fasciculations in the tongue. So if you find the size and shape of the tongue is normal, then the inference will be normal. And ask the subject to protrude the tongue and move it sidewards. So the tongue is not deviated and the subject will be able to move in and out and also sidewards against resistance. So I'll show it in the picture later. So what happens is in unilateral paralysis, the tongue will deviate towards the paralysis side. So this is because the right hypoglossal nerve, it supplies muscles of the left side of the tongue and this causes movement of the tongue towards the left side and vice versa. So in bilateral paralysis, the person will not be able to protrude out his tongue at all. So next, ask the subject to move his tongue from one side to other side or to lick his cheek and observe whether he can do it freely or not. So this is how you are going to check for the movements of the tongue. So if you find the subject is able to do all these movements and if there is no change in the size and shape of the tongue, then the hypoglossal nerve is intact. So you can see. So this is how you are going to check for the hypoglossal nerve. So finally, you are going to write the report. So on clinical examination of 7 to 12 cranial nerve of the subject, it is found to be normal. So you are going to check and you are going to write the tabular column for each of the cranial nerves and you are going to mention all about the tests You're going to write the observation for both the right side as well as the left side, and the inference will be written. So once you come back, a demo on all this test will be given. So see to it that you all prepare the tabular column and keep it ready. Okay. So I'll be taking the attendance. I request you people not to leave. Okay. So thank you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope all of you are safe and fine. Thank you all.